Lemon Amiga presents a Playguide video review. Sit back and enjoy the show.
Hi there, welcome once again to another Lemon Amiga Playguide and review. In this episode we'll be taking a look at Supercars 2, developed by Magnetic Fields and released by Gremlin Graphics on Amiga in May 1991. So as soon as the game loads we can see Harrison Ford there has made it onto a communication screen introducing the game. We drive an Alfa Romeo SZ, which in this case is taken from the original Supercars 1 game, and you can see some information about that. If we leave the credits to roll, we'll also find the story continues with Harrison Ford there on the reporting desk, and that creates a great atmosphere and a great introduction to this game. You'll find those hand-drawn graphics there, and Nancy Allen from RoboCop in name only according to Andrew Morris, and she will introduce us to the high scores in this game. There are 3 levels, the easy, the medium and the hard level. So by pressing the fire button, that takes us to the main menu. Here we can choose the level of difficulty, and let's start with the easy mode. We'll run through the other options a little later. So to begin, when we start the game on easy mode, you can see we are the red car, and all we have to do, just like Supercars, is to make our way from the back of the grid, which contains 9 other racers, and we have to make our way all the way up there to win the race. And if we make it within the top 4, we'll continue, and if we don't, then we are out. Unlike Supercars 1, you may see missiles flying around there, and that adds an extra element to this game, as we shall certainly see later on. Unfortunately at the moment we are driving rather slowly with a weedy setup, and unfortunately the controls and the handling of this game are pretty similar to Supercars 1, i.e. pretty laggy and very much understeering around those corners. So set up those turns slightly earlier than anticipated and drag that car around. Sometimes you might overcorrect yourself there, trying to keep that thing in a straight line. But you can see elevation changes there and very smart graphics, but you'll notice the colours are a little dark, and if this is supposed to be the full screen daylight experience, then well, the colour palette has certainly been darkened to cater for the connoisseur Amiga user. But you can see there I have 1 lap remaining and I'm only in position 4. Pulling stunts like that isn't going to help, and yes, if we collide with the side of that road, that will severely hamper us, and any collision whatsoever will severely harm our chances. So let's avoid doing that, and let's see if we can get up into that 3rd position, squeeze through there. And it didn't award me that position, so I must have been overtaking a back marker there, and well, unfortunately that's race finished and I'm only in 4th position. After each race we can see a breakdown of our damage, and if we click on trade, that will actually bring up the weapons select screen where we can sell and buy weapons at our heart's desire. You can see I sold those rear missiles to give us some extra cash, and sometimes, as we shall see, buying things and accumulating those in the stock market is a great way to run this game. the moment. I'm buying 2 shields there, which will hopefully save us getting blown up. We can buy up to 3 shields, which will not slow the car down, but what that will do is we can run straight through those missiles without getting blown up. Unfortunately, if we don't make these jumps at the perfect angle, we'll still blow up, and no amount of shielding will help that. You can see the leaders have already made it, and if we had have made that jump, that would have given us the greatest start on this level, and the rest from there is easy. You can see the levels are slightly more tricky than Supercars 1, but again they have the same AI opponents who will stick to the racing line like glue. So if you want to bash those out of the way, sometimes that's the only thing to do. And as our car is very much slow at the moment, you can see it's matching the opponent's speed for speed, unlike Supercars 1. So we have to really pull out all the stops, and we have to make those jumps first time, otherwise we are going to be nowhere. Finding ourselves behind the pack there, that's great. The missile blew one of those up for us, and we can take advantage of those random elements in this game. The game is certainly full of those random elements, and hopefully if I can get beyond these guys, maybe take my time there. Well, I could have taken my time and made my life a little easier, but pushing past those guys meant it's an early death. Luckily we have limited lives. As long as that damage, you can see a single damage meter has replaced the multitude of damage meters on Supercars 1, and it's only just in the yellow there. So it would have made more sense to have the last colour green rather than yellow, but anyway, we are just about in there, and you can see we are in position 2, so hopefully we aren't too far behind the leader now. There he is, and with 1 lap to go now as we go under the line, it's going to be a tall order unless we don't hit anything. Making that jump by this stage is certainly recommended, and in my book, if you want a great position, is the minimum requirement. You can see I'm struggling in second position there, but one of those cars is the leader, and I failed to make it. Well, second there gives us a load of cash that we can spend repairing our vehicle. Just clicking on those elements will instantly repair that and take that money away from our coffers. But you can see there, with almost 1.5 grand at the bank, we can spend that on bumpers, but we cannot afford the engine, we cannot afford anything else basically. So sometimes it's a good idea to sell those forward missiles and get a little extra cash, because we do not need those. But in this case I'm actually doing the opposite. I'm actually buying front missiles for 160, and hopefully buying those at that price. When we come to the next race, I should be able to sell those for a higher price, and that means we have a lot more cash. So let's see if we can turn that into reality. And you can see the road is very narrow on this track, and it's taking all my skill and finger on and off that fire button to keep the power down enough to keep us going there, and without hitting anything I'm ricocheting on the side there like pinball. But the aim is obviously to not hit anything, including the other cars. Sometimes wandering into those missiles, you have to do that, and there's no other way around it unless you have the reactions of an absolute master. But if we have those shields, we can absorb those missiles, so that's the first thing I bought whilst they were cheap. And at this stage, I will say buying things in the shop largely depends on their price, and sometimes it's worth buying things simply because they are cheap, particularly the bumpers, the shields and the engines. So here we go, we have 3 laps remaining, we are in position 3, and we have not suffered any more of those rear missile attacks. Sometimes we can get right up close to those guys there, literally bump those out of the way, and it turns into stock car racing. But you can see a little over anxious there with those controls, slows down, and a few more of those bumps really don't help our chances. Let's try and keep the first position there. Sometimes you might find that you're in first position by default if the players in front tend to get blown up, and when they do, obviously your position will change accordingly. So you can see cars blowing each other up. Again, the random elements in this game really make or break it, and you can be extremely lucky playing this game, even if your driving skills aren't up to par. So that's 1 more lap to go. We are still in first position, and it looks like we are approaching a back marker. It would have been great to get extra score for back markers like ATR, but we don't, and so all we can do is pot around that track and try and save as much of that damage as possible. We gain 5 championship points for every win, and that puts us up to 11. But the communication screens in this game add yet another element. A complete random between the races, a number of characters will pop up and offer us questions. By answering those right, we will gain money. In this case, it's given us the opportunity to lose less money, because those police and those animal rights activists will always take money from us unless we answer every single one of those questions perfectly. You may notice the front missiles are 150, and that's 10 less than what we actually paid for those, so our plan has not worked out. Let's skip on to the next level. Race 4 out of the 7 that we get on the easy level is relatively hard because we have to travel through tunnels, and if we manage to line the car up as we enter that tunnel, then that makes that job easy, and if we can't, then we'll just have to hope that that thing will go in a straight line. You can see a very long tunnel there, and if those guys plant mines in that tunnel, which they are wont to do on this level, we can't always avoid those, but we have 3 shields that we bought in the shop, and we bought an extra shield just before we bought all that useless firepower that we've managed to keep on the stock records. But we have 3 shields, and that will soak up most of the mines. Maybe 1 in 10 of those mines and missiles will still blow us up even with 3 shields, but 1 in 10 isn't so bad. The rest of the time we can concentrate on bumping around that track, and you can see there I am up to 4th place, and there are no jumps on this level. All we can do is keep going and take those corners nice and early because of the understeer. And yes, look at that, the road bumping me towards that mine, but with careful controls and handling we can avoid most of these obstacles. The road isn't very hard to memorize, and none of these courses are very hard to memorize, unlike games such as Nitro and ATR. So the jumping action of Supercars 2 is quite easy for a novice to get into. Not amazingly easy, but at least it isn't as easy as Supercars 1, which was kind of a pushover. You can see if we line that car up just as we are about to enter that tunnel, that means we can guess the rest, and these levels have instant hookability. You can see I'm dicing for 2nd position there, and that car really not wanting to give that position up. The positions are a little laggy sometimes, so you have to be well in front of those guys for that to register, and you can see bumping me down there. We'll gain 4,000 for the 2nd position, as opposed to 3,000 for 3rd, and 5 grand for the win. But continuing on there, we are at least in 2nd position, and with no laps remaining, it doesn't look like we are on for another win. Let's hope he gets blown up, and unfortunately not. That's 4,000 credits and another 4 points. Perhaps luckily we have been granted an interview with our sponsor. By answering these questions correctly, he will then dish out lots of money, and that will help us in our quest to win the championship. Just like Supercars 1, the answers are not obvious, and you will have to struggle through those as best as you can. And there are definitely questions in there which will make him throw you out of the office. So far so good. I think you can have maybe 5,000 or 10,000 extra if you answer all of his questions correctly, and we aren't doing too badly, and the more he asks us, then the more money we can get, and if he stops asking us questions, then we are out of the office. But look at that, no way Jose B, no way Jose, or no way. Which would you choose? I'm going to say no way. And he says, no way am I giving you any more cash, you can have 3,500, now get out. So that was a little lucrative. I now have 6,000, and you can see those missiles have gone up in price. When we select to sell, that will actually lower the price because the selling value is always lower than the buying price. You can see now with 9 grand in the bank, we can now afford the engines, even at 4,000 each. And we're actually going to buy these bumpers because they're fairly cheap, and anything which is under 1,000 is cheap in this game. And at least the items on the bottom row. If the items on the top row are around 100 or 180, at least below 200, then they are cheap, and it's time to buy those. And you already saw I managed to make 6 grand profit just by selling a few useless missiles. With that extra engine, you may hear and you'll certainly see that the car is a little bit faster, and now we have a running chance from the go. If you buy an engine after the first race, then you'll have the best chance over the rest of the races, and unlike Supercars 1, the opponents do not tweak their ability depending on the speed and the controllability of our car. No, they will maintain their easiness, and if we have 3 engines by now, then we can lap this field like they are standing still. Unfortunately, or fortunately as it may be on this level, we also have the extra element of a train, and if we collide into that train at complete random, then we will die. We can of course stop before colliding with that train if we are quick, and we can pause before that junction. But in the main, when we loop this level, the train will stagger itself at random, and sooner or later we'll come face to face with it and we'll have to take it on. At the moment I am avoiding the train, and yes, you can get into a pattern of a few laps where you only just avoid it, but you can see I am avoiding it, and 2 laps remaining, including the one that we are on. And it isn't always obvious where the line is in this game, but you can see there the line is just after that train, and we are now in first position. And look at those idiot drivers there colliding and sending me into the barrier. Well, sometimes they will do that, and if you don't stay on your toes and you don't avoid those guys, well, very lucky there. If you don't avoid those guys, then sometimes they can write you off. But that's a great lap, hardly any damage, 5 points. And unfortunately, the next communication screen actually brings up a driving instructor. Here, by answering the questions right, we can actually win championship points, up to 5 I think, and unfortunately I've answered those wrong, and he's actually docked me 4 points from the championship, which is absolutely terrific. The good news is we've got 5 grand in the bank, but look at those missiles, they're actually worth a lot, and if we sell those, that puts us up to 7. I'm going to use that money to buy these cheap engines at 2 grand a piece, and it still leaves 3 grand to invest in more missiles. So the homing missile there, and protection missile, which will loop around the car a number of times to protect that. I'm actually going to buy a couple of those, and by clicking on front we can equip a certain missile to our front fire, i.e. pushing forward on the controller, and by selecting rear and then the object we can pull back on the controller, and that will fire that item off, no matter whether that's a missile or a protection device or even a jump. We can jump in this game, as we shall hopefully see later on, but for the moment I have a number of protection missiles which I'm holding in reserve. This is the penultimate track on this easy first level, and so this is track 6 out of the 7. Again, the only thing to watch out for is those jumps, and if we can jump and turn perfectly, then we'll make it. Sometimes it helps to slow down just before those jumps and aim perfectly, but if we slow down too much, then we won't make it, and if we collide into the side, we won't make it. So very difficult controls there. Sometimes you can do it with a run-up, but you have to get that perfect, and if there are any cars in the way, then you will be taken down with them, which as far as I'm concerned is fair enough. You can see I'm in first position there, which is great heading on to the last race, and it's about time. Those 3 engine upgrades certainly came in handy, and you can see at this point the car is fairly quick, but you may notice the speed meter on the bottom corner. That speed never actually reaches top speed, even if we have all 3 engine upgrades. So that speed will only ever crawl halfway across that counter, and so to my mind that is broken. What is the point of having a speed counter if it only goes halfway? But this is as fast as we can go, and you can see we are making those jumps. Sometimes with less speed it can be easier to make jumps, but if we have full speed it's easier to maintain the lead, and so that's what we are doing. This game was released on the Amiga, on the PC, and also on the Atari ST. According to the wiki article, it was also released on the Commodore 64, but unfortunately that is a lie. So there will be no conversion comparison zone, but we will take a look at the comparison zone since we haven't done that in quite some time. You can see compared to these other candidates there, Supercars 2 is a little darker, certainly darker than ATR. You can hear the music from ATR there, replacing Supercars 1, and it's great to have music in a game. Unfortunately they did not include it, but it's still easier to control than the unpredictable Overdrive there by Team 17, and that was the game they released before ATR, which I don't find very playable at all. You also saw Nitro there in the bottom corner, and it's great to have Nitro in the review. I think this game is action-packed enough to stand out from Supercars 1, and it's got more bonus weapons upgrades and better feel and playability than Overdrive. It's a lot easier to memorise the courses than Nitro and of course ATR. So I think this game really stands up, and certainly on this easy level as we go on to the final track, it certainly stands up. So let's clear all the damage away. And I'm actually going to leave that 390 because we've already got maximum damage repaired, so let's not waste that cash. And sometimes, yes, you can waste cash on upgrades and they will not repair the damage, or at least as much as you'd hoped. Checking out the bank account, we have 4 grand in the bank, and we still have 2 of those wraparound missiles. So we have 2 boosts, and by pulling back on the joystick, having assigned that earlier on, then I can use that to jump, just like that, over the cars in the field. On this last course, sometimes jumping over the first few cars is handy, and you can see those 3 shields which I bought are soaking up those missiles. You can also see on this track very short cuts, and if we are on time, then we can cut through those, and that will save us some time. The rest of the field will either collide into those, or they'll have to go around. The best tactic is to wait, and you saw there if I'd have waited and taken that shortcut, I'd have beaten the pack, but being too ambitious there, driving in a straight line, yes, I've overtaken 1 car, but I could have overtaken 2 in that space, and so being brave in this game, even at this early stage, is an opportunity that the player cannot afford to miss. If we collide too heavily into the scenery, we'll blow up, and if those gates close on us, then we'll certainly blow up, but sometimes the player can be lucky, and the level is fairly lenient with its collision detection. So let's squeeze in again there, and that's precisely what you have to do. I'm in 2nd position, and by pulling forward on the joystick, I've actually triggered the surround missile, and that blew up a number of those opponents. That gives us the 2nd position, and it won't be long before we get 1st, because sometimes the leaders do get blown up, and you saw their position 1, and sometimes you can see materializing behind us the leaders who got blew up. But as long as we are in position 1 there, I'm actually going to stop and turn around and make that shortcut anyway, because it's always worth it and will always save us time. These laps really do tick off quickly, and they aren't as stressful as ATR, when the player might drive straight into tokens, and those tokens on ATR are vital to pick up. In this game, we do not find any tokens whatsoever, not even any cash bags or money on the road. All we find are the 9 opponents, and all we have to do is to crash and bash, shoot and avoid those as best as possible, and get ourselves into that 1st position. Again, watching out for being overtaken there before they overtake us back, and that position is wiped off, which is a very weird aspect in this game. But let's not fall for the bugs, let's just continue, and hopefully now, with a few corners to go, that's the easy level completed. When the championship is over, we will see the result of our final race, and we will also be given a rating. In this case, I am motoring Maestro for 26 points. Unfortunately, I scored 28 points there on my previous run, so it is possible to score more than that. Let's check out the medium level. I have to say, it's slightly a shame that we don't get music on this game, and those magnetic fields vacuum cleaner engine noises really don't cut it. They really did work in Lotus 1 and Lotus 2, and basically the Lotus series, but in this game, well, those engine noises aren't amazing, and they actually remind me more of the latest Formula 1 V6s, i.e. they sound pretty quiet. But taking a look at the producers of this game, it was coded once again by Sean Southern, and the graphics were drawn by Andrew Morris using D-Paint. Once again, they were helped by Jeremy C. Smith, who worked on Exile in 91 and the AGA version in 95, and the music was created by Barry Leach, who we last heard of in the Lotus 2 review, and you may remember he also created the music for Silkworm and the music for Impossible, which we will get to see eventually. He also created music for Lethal Weapon, the excellent Gemini Wing, and Back to the Future Part 3. And that's a small number out of the 31 music titles listed on the Lemon Amiga website. So Barry Leach, with great introductory music there, very rocky and very atmospheric. But unfortunately those sound effects are a little weedy and they don't really give a crash and bang to this game, which it desperately needed. But you can see bumping behind those cars sounds like we're bumping a curb rather than bumping the back of a car, and so the sound effects in this game could have been better. The controls and the handling still aren't brilliant, and there is no power steering in this game like Supercars 1, and you can see that would have helped beyond measure because I'm still colliding into things because of the tight turning circle. But as soon as the leader goes over the line, that's race over, and meanwhile a rich uncle has left us some money in his will, and so the solicitor will ask us a number of questions, and if we get these right, the more money that we will gain. If we get these wrong, then she will kick us out. So, well, unfortunately that was a wrong answer, and that's only awarded as 500 quid. So let's use that to clear our damage. Returning there, we will find 6 front and 6 rear missiles, which we can now sell for an easy grand. And you can see the prices there. Well, the engines are fairly cheap at £2 a piece, so let's buy those early. We also start with a free shield, even though we can only have 3 as the maximum. You can see if I sell those forward missiles, that will give us some cash, and you can see those boosts there, those turbo boosts in the bottom right corner are fairly cheap, being under the 200 barrier. So let's load up on those, 14, and let's hope we can sell those for a profit. You can see by my driving style, I don't tend to employ many missiles, and yes, you can employ missiles to your heart's content in this game to literally blow the field away. The enemies will have their own preferred weapon on each individual course, and on this course it's mines. Perhaps my favourite weapon is the super missile, and that wraps around the player and blows these guys away. And if you can't use that, the Homer is pretty expensive, but if you can buy that for less than £1,000, then it's worth spending that in an emergency. But that's pretty expensive, and I hardly ever use the mines, and I never use the forward and rear missiles. I'd rather just bump those guys out of the way. You can see there the enemies trying to use their missiles against me, but unfortunately, well, sometimes you just can't avoid it. Sometimes that thing will take a beating. But you can see tremendous understeer means I'm crashing and bumping all over the place there. Definitely the understeer in this game is one thing which slightly spoils it, and no power assist unfortunately, not like Supercars 1. But I feel the track layouts are so much more interesting than Supercars 1 that it makes this game far more playable, with or without the missiles. I also really appreciate the fact that the animation of the car changes when we go over those rises and those curves and those elevation changes. That gives the illusion of 3D, and we can see that car really angling in different positions there. So even though this is a straight overhead racer, at least they've given the illusion of 3D. When we bank on those circuits, unfortunately we cannot rise on those high banks because of the narrow exit to that section. It would have been nice to have an oval and have a Days of Thunder type race on an Indy circuit. One way in which we can save money is by clicking on the right repair icons, and clicking on those in the right order will give us most damage repaired, but unfortunately we have no idea which are the best. I don't think any of those have any bearing on the car handling whatsoever, although I could be wrong when it comes to the power steering adjust. In the meantime, let's sell all those turbo boosts, and now we can have enough money to buy ourselves another upgrade. In this case, let's buy another armour and a bumper. The bumpers will allow us to blow up cars in our way, and if we have 3 bumpers there, it means we can collide with vehicles in front of us, and they should blow up. At least if they don't blow up, then they won't cause us any damage. So having 3 bumpers can help, and as we shall see from the launch, sometimes colliding with those is opportune, but look at that, completely missed the shortcut, and that puts us at the back of the pack. So those bumpers haven't blown anything up yet. Let's just crash and burn and see what happens. The opponent's firing missiles wildly there, and let's see if we can make it. No, let's not even attempt to make that shortcut, because if we fail and that door closes behind, then that's a life over, and we get infinite lives. Don't forget, all we need to do is to keep that damage from bottoming out. So can we make it this time? And just about. You have to be brave there, and it might delay the car by 5 seconds every time we get blown up, and in that time we will certainly be overtaken by at least a number of cars, and those gates will remain open for maybe 5 seconds. So if you can see those appearing in front of you, then head for those. If they are already open, then it might be best to make a dive for it, but if they are wide open and just about to close, obviously don't go for those or you'll get crushed, and being crushed in this game isn't very helpful and is best avoided. So Supercars 2 really does provide something extra on every level, and on this level it's the opening and closing of the barriers which we have to master. This is definitely one of my favourite all-time racing games on the Amiga, and I don't play this as much as Lotus Esprit Turbo Challenge, which is an absolute masterpiece, and it's not hard to imagine this as being a top-down version of Lotus Esprit Turbo Challenge, and maybe the roads aren't quite as wide, and we don't get jumps either on the original Lotus. But hats off to the programmers for producing yet another smooth game on the Amiga. And the leader has gone over the line. We are second. So it's always a good idea to repair all our damage, because we can certainly afford that. And you can see there, well, look at those. The missiles are very expensive, but the forward missiles are fairly cheap. You can see the boosts have gone up to 400, and the homing missiles 910. But we can afford the extra armour, so let's use the money on that and continue on to the next race. At this stage, the player may notice that the graphics don't vary much from level to level, and they use the same green and grey colour palette. So green and grey there make up most of the colours, with the red provided by our own racer. But the colour palette could have been maybe a little brighter, and it's certainly nowhere near as bright as Supercars 1. I think this is actually a great feature because it makes the game feel deeper and more shaded, but I can't help feeling that the programmers could have added an option where the palette was tweaked and the screen was brighter, because it appears a little too dark for me. That great explosion effect is probably the best effect in the game, and it gives the player a real sense of mayhem with all this action going on. But if the graphics are too dark and the sound effects aren't good enough, there is no music, the controllability is a little laggy, and there is no power steering or things like that. So at first glance you might wonder why this game is so popular, but it's basically the playability does stand up. The impression that the player gets is one of a professionally designed product, and the atmosphere is terrific, and certainly the player's hands will be sweating at this point, bumping and dragging that thing around these corners. So the playability is there, and the longevity is there, because the character of the game really shines through. You can see on this level, certain loop-the-loops there, and if we crash head-on into the opponents, they will drag us along with them, and we will lose places. So it's important to get around those loops. If you can crash a car through those, then they'll have to go around it again. So I crashed straight through the rock in the middle of the road there, and so collision detection is at a premium in this game. So add poor collision detection into the mix as well, but again the playability really shines through of this game, and the weapons and those explosions make the atmosphere really action-packed. Yes, we can even ram those cars head on, and if we have the bumpers when we ram those cars, they will blow up just like that, and that saves us having to get through those guys. And you can see position 1 is there. All we have to do is to avoid the rest, and you can see some cars actually not even taking that round loop there, and sometimes the opponents don't even bother. but unfortunately number 1 was just too far ahead again. Back to the driving test, and these questions are taken from real driving test questions on the whole, but some of them are just a joke, and you have no chance in hell of managing to get through those in one piece because you've no way of knowing which is the right answer. So I've lost yet another 4 points. Back we go to the shop, and in this case the next race requires homing missiles, and the opponents will have homing missiles at their disposal. So let's just buy a couple of those and assign those to our front of the car by clicking on front and clicking on that. And let's also buy 2 boosts as well and assign those to the rear. So you can just about see in red front and rear by the side of those. So if I pull back, that will give us a boost. But on this course, the best thing to do is just to ram the other cars. You certainly need the upgraded engine and all the armour and bumpers that thing can carry. The most important thing on this level is avoiding the firepower of those enemies, and they will fire homing missiles towards us, and all we need to do is to stay off the racing line and those should just fly straight by. But you can see there, those corners determine to fling me off, and if you do take those corners pretty damn wide, then you should be able to avoid the firepower and get around those at the same time. You can see I'm in second position there, and this track can be infuriating when you get blown up time and time again and you don't have any missiles to do anything about it. If you see one of those homing missiles approaching, all you can do is to veer wildly left and right and hope you avoid it. Otherwise, plugging in along as fast as you can there is the only thing you can do. Comparing this game to ATR, we find that ATR had a silky smooth opening presentation sequence, and the feel of the game was highly polished and professional. The frame rates were just as smooth, even though the car moved a little bit quicker, and it certainly handled better in ATR. But unfortunately, the ATR has its own version of mistakes, and in that game, bouncing around tokens and driving straight under those before you've collected those is infuriating, and so there isn't those infuriances in this game. What there is dodging action. As long as we strafe those barriers, look at that, near misses aplenty there. Whoa, unlucky. Sometimes we'll just have to die. And sometimes when we respawn, we'll die straight away. Luckily with those armour upgrades, that has saved us from yet another early death. So this game can appear unfair under the surface. It certainly is possible to play this because you have the upgrades, and if you have the armour and the shields and everything else, and the firepower particularly, then the game is as playable as you want it to be. So you can see no laps remaining. If I hold everything together, I'm in first position, and fingers crossed we make it to the line. It's great to see that the names in the high score table are exactly the same as the ones we found on Lotus 1, and even Mickey Lauder is there. So those humorous names there of Formula 1 drivers, I certainly appreciated that when I played this in 1991, and for those who forgot, Ayrton Senna won the World Championship in 1991 as he did in 1990. On the Amiga, I've decided to buy 9 forward missiles, again trying to save those and trying to sell those later for a little more cash. All the ones on the bottom of the screen are all on 3, i.e. full, so as long as we can upgrade by the time we get to this level, then we have a fighting chance. The only downside is the controllability of this game, and funneling through these bottlenecks is a little like pinball. But this level is tricky for a whole different reason, because if we have 2 engines, then we can glide over the central section pretty easily. If we have 1, then we may just about make it, but if we have ×3 engine power, like we have at the moment, you'll find that's too fast to make those central jumps, and the player will have to slow down a modicum as they take the top corner and line that up perfectly, otherwise they'll find themselves at the back of the pack. So those jumps are extra tricky with the engines, and if the player has saved themselves buying the extra engine upgrade, then that won't be a disability on this level. In fact, it will be an advantage. So that's definitely one tip to remember. The next level definitely requires the third engine power-up, otherwise you'll get nowhere. But yes, these tricks and tips have to be learnt and have to be mastered, because if you bought the third engine and you find you have no way to get over there because we are just too fast, then that's a mistake the player will have to learn the hard way. So this game is a little unfair there, making the player learn, and we are almost to the end now of this medium level. And I think there are 10 tracks on the medium level, and we aren't too far from the end. But once again, unless we qualify in the top 4, we will find ourselves out of the championship completely. You can see I'm in position 8 at the moment, giving that guy a furious battle. But trying to get past those guys into first position on this race is basically a write-off with 2 laps to go, and I'm seriously not going to make it. That's basically boiling down to the engine. But you can see a good college try there will make us get through that field, and it always gives us the impetus to continue until the final race over. So unfortunately, too fast again, rebound off that rise, and we find ourselves at the back. So let's take a look now at the hard levels. On the title screen, you may also notice a communication screen option, and yes, we can turn on and off the communication screens, so we don't have to worry about losing championship points with the driving instructor or gaining points necessarily with the sponsor. And yes, there are maybe 8 different characters in this game. The police will take money off us, and the animal rights activists we've seen already will take that cash away. But if we turn off the communication screens, then we turn off the possibility of gaining money from the solicitor and the sponsor and the press agent. So that is certainly recommended to leave those screens on. If you lose a lot of money with those things, sometimes again they can appear unfair, but if you win lots of money with those questions, that significantly boosts our money and our esteem into the bargain. So I like to leave those communication screens on. And if you've ever heard me talking about communication screens in other reviews, when basically an information panel pops up on the screen, well, I call those communication screens basically because of this game. I remember I played this a lot in the 1990s, maybe not as much as Lotus 1, but a little more than Lotus 2. I found the game very appealing in the top-down genre, and as we've seen already, it's certainly a leader on the Amiga. There was no Supercars 3 released, but there was a Supercars International released on the PC. The Supercars International is basically Supercars 2 with 1 or 2 extras bolted on for the PC market. But that was a basic conversion with a few extras, and I wouldn't really call that a brand new game in itself. You can see this first level on the hard section is fairly reminiscent of the first level on the medium section, i.e. we have to get around all those looping roundabouts in one piece and hope we don't drag any of the other cars around there with us. You can see I'm battling there, and the hard mode doesn't start off easy. Of course, you can see it has awarded us some extra speed. We are actually given 2 engine power for free at the start of the hard level, and that's really an advantage to the player. And in the hard mode, the player will really have to not hit anything and get by everything if they want to progress. This includes another trip to the animal rights. And unfortunately, those questions are a little too difficult for me, and yet again she's charged us the full whack, £5,000, or 5,000 credits cash at least. But you may notice that these games are in pounds because, of course, Gremlin Graphics was based in Sheffield and Magnetic Fields was a British-based computer games developer. So, of course, the money would be in pounds. You can also see that we've been given 18 rockets from the go, So let's sell those, and hopefully we can afford to repair our car. Certainly repairing our car damage above 50% is the best way around things. The only hard part, again, is choosing the right money to spend in the right place, and if we don't, then that bar won't move an inch. But as soon as you find the right one with the most damage, then the bar will finally reset, and now we have full health. You may notice that we just have enough money to buy ourselves an armor upgrade, and so spending £2 on that going on to the next level is probably money well spent. Unfortunately, again, the level requires us to have 2 engine power, and if we had ×3 upgrade on that power unit at this point, we will find the level is probably impossible. Yes, too much power on these jumps makes it impossible, and with 2 engine power it should be possible if we don't get blown up before we even get there. So hopefully we'll make that into reality. Luckily most of the other drivers will get blown up as well, but usually the top 4 or 5 will make it, and so you have to make sure that you get across that thing at least once, and that guarantees us a high position. But look at that, a mine yet again has blown us up. So let's see if we can do it. Just about on the power, hold it on a straight line, full power, and that's how you get through. But that hasn't saved us much, and homing missiles flying around there. So the player will be panicking at this stage in 3rd position, knowing that if they drop another place then they are out, and that's the hard mode over. So you can see making micro adjustments is possible when we touch the ground. Obviously we cannot do that in the air, but as soon as that car touches the ground we can actually make micro adjustments and hopefully straighten that thing up. But while we are in the air, just like Stunt Car Racer, we'll have to make that thing come down before we can make any changes. But look at that, sometimes you can, and sometimes that just throws off your timing and you will collide into those barriers. And so arm call in this game has never been used to greater effect, and the arm call all around these levels ensure that we don't crash off, and the player doesn't crash off too many times, although you've seen I can explode, but luckily that doesn't happen too often. Let's try again for that perfect crossing, and yes, it is possible making those adjustments all the way along, but if you can get that thing in a straight line to begin with, that makes that job easy. So now we are in position 1, we have 1 more lap to go after this, and we have half our damage remaining. So hopefully I've now written my ticket to the end. Even though I'm crashing at the moment, I should be able to overtake those last few drivers, even if we can't make it into 1st position. Luckily we have it. At this stage, the trickiness of these levels is really difficult, and also not as difficult as Supercars 1 on the later divisions, but still difficult enough. So the player won't have an increasing Everest descent there, as the difficulty really spikes during the end, but I've managed to get onto the final screen of the hard level, so it's certainly not as hard as Supercars 1. You saw the player's AI doesn't really change from level to level either, and again they don't speed up depending on our engine power and our car model. Unfortunately we can only have 1 car model in this game. You can see the Suzuki Marauder V16T there in the corner in the 1st game, and unfortunately we do not get to drive that, and we only just have enough money there. Let's buy ourselves some more armor, and let's increase the bumpers to the top, because this next level contains a train, and unless we have the armor and the bumpers, we will find train levels are always difficult. So when we are happy with our condition of our vehicle, and raising those cheap bumpers there, 270 is certainly cheap for a bumper, but let's not buy any more missiles because they're relatively expensive. On this level, not only do we find a train, we also find a number of cut-throughs, and if we manage to cut through 5 times, then that will chop out half of the race. And you can see there, in the meantime, good driving has actually given us a half-decent position. That's certainly the position you want to be in after 1 lap. Again, like the other train level, if we career around this track as fast as we can, then we will find the train has found its way behind us, and all we can do is put our foot down and we should hopefully be able to outrun that thing. Unfortunately, we've no idea when the train is about to appear, and if it does appear while we are making a run and we find idiots blocking the road, well, that's life over. Luckily, that homing missile has blown up that idiot, but unluckily, that homing missile has just blown me up. So the annoyances start to pile up in this game, and it can all be disaster in next to no time if you just find yourself with no luck. And luck is a part of this game, and good driving is the other part. And the third part is knowing what questions you're supposed to pick on those communication screens. But luckily, unlike Supercars 1, it does not require us to actually get through those in order to complete the game, and we are not required to answer questions simply to upgrade our vehicle, which is great. It means we can get all the engine power and all the missiles, and that doesn't boil down to pot luck. But you can see on the Amiga, I'm braving it there, and sometimes when those things just about open, when we get there, we can risk it and we can time those things, but unfortunately there's no way to time that train, and if it's there just at the wrong moment, then the player will take a dive. Luckily, we can respawn there after the others have gone, and if we are quick, we can actually outrace and outpace those other guys, having got themselves stuck behind those barriers. You can see the AI doesn't really give those guys a fighting chance until those barriers open, and that AI is pretty pathetic, but that gives the player some impetus to continue and squeezing by these barriers. It looks like my luck is now back in. I am now in second position and avoiding those roadside obstacles which litter the way. It looks like we have a fighting chance at the lead, but oh no, we forgot to time the train. I've found myself shouting at this game, waiting for it to respawn on the nick of time so that I can gain those higher positions. But we've no idea where that first place is, and as soon as he drives over the line, then no matter where we are, that's our race over. You can see that damage is petering out there. I'm almost in the red, but that has not affected the car dynamics one way or the other. So let's try and avoid that train, and if I stop, that will give us that opportunity, but no, too many crashes, and I'm in second position. Let's see if we can get any further with our benefactor. Our uncle has just died, and unless we know our uncle's answers and his preferences inside out, then unfortunately that woman will not cough over the inheritance that we deserve, and even answering a few questions correctly does not necessarily give us the big bucks. In this case, the big bucks has amounted to 500 quid, which is enough to repair our damage. At this stage, I'm being pretty wild there with the repairs because I have enough money, and again, let's just leave one of those behind because it won't make any impacts on that damage. That's good enough for me. You may notice on this screen we have the Commodore Amiga manual there on the bookcase, and we also have a boxed copy of Lotus Esprit Turbo Challenge there, along with a clock which doesn't move, and an imitation of the Amiga 1000 computer. It's great to see those disc boxes and disc labels there, reminding us how life used to be not so very long ago. But in the meantime, let's move on to my doom. This is going to be the very final track. I'll be showing you in the hard mode, basically because I'm not going to complete this and I won't get any further. This includes jumps and tunnels and missiles and everything that we've managed to come up with so far. So if we can put all those to good use, we'll get far. If we can't, these incredible jumps and the incredible dexterity it requires to get over these things may even defeat the player. The magazine reviewers gave this game high praise in general. Amiga Power gave Supercars 2 73%, Amiga User International gave it 77%, Amiga Format gave it 80%, and then gave the re-release 82%, Zero gave it 88%, the Amiga gave Supercars 2 90%, the One gave it 91%, and Amiga Action actually gave this game 93% in May 1991. They said this game is Firefox on wheels, and what they actually meant was the Clint Eastwood aerial classic has been transformed onto four-wheel drive, and from there we can fire a host of missiles into our enemies. But Firefox on wheels it may be, I think this game has some charm and some character of its own, particularly the hand-drawn communication screens, and the atmosphere is really terrific. Even the colour palette, it's the atmosphere, and the difficulty curve is just about perfect throughout. If the player dies, then they may know it's their fault, although there are one or two annoyances if the player gets through a little bad luck. But in general, I think Supercars 2 is an excellent addition to the Amiga driving canon, and I certainly remember playing this to my heart's content back in the day. It has that appeal, and I wouldn't recommend this highly enough. And that's despite the sound effects and the lack of music and the controls that I've mentioned already. Yes, those things, or a lack of, do not spoil this game, and it still is a masterpiece despite all that. The title music and the in-game communications music is memorable, and again those Cinemaware-esque hand-drawn graphics by Jeremy C. Smith is appreciated, and it made my Amiga look amazing. Having this on a rolling demo was one of the things which made me buy an Amiga in the first place, along with Lotus Esprit Turbo Challenge. So I really do like this game. It is annoying, but sometimes it is less annoying than ATR when a vital upgrade isn't driven under by mistake. Thank you once again for viewing a play guide and review to another Amiga classic, Supercars 2. Hope to see you again in our next episode, and until then, thank you.